G'day guys, welcome back to the channel. This episode we're picking up from where we left off last episode. So I'm going to finish out the welding on the chassis reinforcing plates, then move on to mounting the shocks, coils, radius arms, panhard, and then we can actually cycle the suspension and make sure everything works. I've changed my mind on maybe a couple of things, just from how it's all sitting and how it's all working out, and I have an absolute Facebook Marketplace miracle. So hang around for that. Let's get into it. Back in for the next day here. I had to go yesterday afternoon. I didn't quite get as much done as I wanted to. So I just had to tidy up a few welds. I had a bit of breeze blow through yesterday, which caused a bit of porosity. So I'm going to grind that porosity out and fix some welds up and then finish welding out this plate. I spoke to the engineer. He is happy to sort of do stitch welds, but fully weld in the high load areas, like where they do coil over or coil hat mount would go. So there's really not, once you sort of weld those areas, there's really not much left. So I've just decided to fully weld it, and he's happy with that as well. So go through, fully weld the plate on, then we'll look at putting the axle sitting at the front here, putting the axle underneath and sort of half mocking it up to see where it's going to sit. For another week. This is the following weekend from the earlier part of the video that you've seen so far. So as you saw, I chopped the chassis in half. This is the 80 series chassis, obviously. I'm going to try and rob all the brackets off this part and chuck it onto the Colorado chassis. I did some measuring through the week and I think I've changed my mind on the coilovers. I think going to the coils and a shock, I'll still put a good remote reservoir shock on it, but I think using coils and a remote res shock is probably better reliability and serviceability and finding parts in the future if we ever have a breakdown out somewhere remote. Steering that direction at the moment, depending how this all sort of works out, but I think it should work out okay. So I'm going to go through and plasma cut off all the brackets off the chassis so I can start tacking them onto there. It's going to be a lot easier this time with the plasma cutter because I can hack into the chassis and it's not a problem whatsoever because I'm not using any obviously because the front fell off. Alright, so both coil hats and shock mount brackets are cleaned up off the 80 series chassis. There was a lot more work in that than I expected to clean that all up. So it's all done now. We've got this side tacked on and I've got the steering box here. I've actually decided to use a GU Patrol steering box just because they are well known for being stronger, less likely to leak. So if I'm going to custom mount a box, I might as well mount the strongest one. So I'm going to go through and make sure that all fits because one of the problems with the GU steering box is that it is quite a bit longer than the 80 series box. So I've got to make sure that I can make that all fit with this setup here before I go through and weld it all up. Alright, so I got a fair bit of play there with the steering box. That's good. So now what I'll probably do is go through and get the other side tacked on in the same location. I'll probably pinch the panhard rod bracket that'll go here for the chassis end. I want to go through and tack on the radius arm radius arm brackets at the chassis end, and I'll be able to basically mount this axle in place. I'll use the 80 series shocks and probably throw some springs underneath it, see how it all sort of looks. Okay guys, it's been a couple of weeks since I filmed that last segment. So that was mid-December, late December. So in there we've had Christmas, New Year's, the blur, lots of food, lots of drink, family, all that sort of good stuff. So I didn't do a lot of work in there, so I'm back into it now mid-January. And in that time, there's been an absolute Facebook marketplace miracle. So you would have seen there I was making the mock-up radius arms using the factory 80 series arms here. Okay, you can see them there. I've obviously cut them and welded a bit of RHS to sort of give me a gauge of where the caster will be and all that sort of stuff, and where the location will be. These ones you see here behind are from the Ironhide Custom kit. So Ironhide Custom in Townsville, they make a kit for this job. They make it for the RC Colorado. They make a lot of different solid axle swap kits. They sort of specialise in it. They do a really good job. A few people have asked me, am I using a kit? So obviously you know by now, you're watching that I'm not using a kit. The main reason for that, for me, really is sort of cost. And obviously there's a few different stages of kit, but it adds cost. It's not cheap. When I can probably do most of the work myself, and I have the 80 series chassis here, I can make work do the job to a similar degree. The other thing too is it would sort of make the job too easy. So, you know, I enjoy a challenge. I enjoy the whole design and that sort of process. So that's sort of where I went with that. I decided to do it myself. So from here, these radius arms make the job a lot easier. I know what the caster should be, or this sets the caster for us. I know where the axle should be based on the Ironhide kit instructions. So basically what I do now is replicate the measurements from the Ironhide kit, and this will be pretty much ready to go, and I know it's going to fit. It is sort of cheating a little bit, but you know, sometimes you get lucky. Okay, so I've got everything set up here to take some measurements from. So we've got the Ironhide radius arms in here. We've got the 80 series factory chassis end brackets, and we've taken a measurement from the inside here to the inside of there, and I've transferred it up onto the factory gearbox cross member. I'm going to notch out a section of the cross member, and that's where this will sit. These are a spacer that will help this bolt hole sit down below the cross member itself, and it sort of makes it look similar to what the height of the radius arm bracket would be. If this is too high or too low, it is going to affect your caster when it's at ride height. So we need to really try and replicate the height of this bolt hole relative to the chassis. So the radius arm chassis brackets are tacked in. So now we can actually physically bolt this diff in and cycle the suspension and check for clearances on everything in the front end. When we're happy with all that, I'll go through and design all new mounts. This is all just for mock-up. I probably didn't make that very clear before. This is not, none of this is permanent here. This is just for mock-up at this end. We'll go through and design new brackets and cross member for here, because obviously we've got to allow for a drive shaft in here now. That's not going to work like that, so we have to design a new cross member to allow for the drive shaft to move up and down, because previously it was just fixed in one location to the IFS diff. Jammed up under the car here. This is at full compression, so we're on the bump stops there. We've got about 20mm clearance around the sump there, center of screen. That's about the closest point. Also at the drive shaft flange is also about the same sort of clearance, the two closest spots. We have contact on the sump and the tie rod, which I knew was happening. Apparently that's a thing with the manuals. The manuals, you need to clearance the sump, so I'll probably weld in a bit of tube cut it out, weld in a bit of tube there so it sort of follows the contour of the tie rod. Make sure it clears at full lock. Obviously it's going to get closer to the sump as it turns, not just at straight ahead. So we'll have to check that when we clearance it, leave plenty of room. So you've got plenty of room there between the panhard mount and the radius arm and the front pumpkin. So I probably will, when I'll redesign that bracket, I'll probably shift it further towards the back of the car, just still leaving plenty of clearance, but I can probably move it back another 30 or 40 mil there. It's good to get it as close as you can, so it's all moving in as close to the same plane or the right plane as possible. Same with the steering box, so the steering box can probably shift back with that as well. Being the GU steering box, I'll have to shorten the steering column anyway, so if I'm shortening it, doesn't really matter how much I shorten it. So I'm shortening anyway, I'll shift the steering box back as well for the same sort of reason. So you want it sort of moving as, you know, as linear as possible with the preventing bump steer, flex steer, whatever you want to call it. I thought we might have had issues with clearance between the drag link and the chassis, but there is plenty of room there. When it's articulated at full compression on this side, it might get a little closer, but it's pretty well in line with the bump stop. So you can see the bump stop behind there, so I can't see it ever really contacting. Okay guys, back in the shed for another day here, and I've been doing some thinking, which is usually a dangerous thing around here. I've decided to go away from the coil and shock setup and go towards a coilover setup. Now I've changed my mind twice in one episode, which is really good, I know. The reason behind changing is a few reasons. Firstly, I wasn't overly happy with the way it looked. You could have reinforced it and made it look nicer and tidied it up a bit more, and it would have looked okay, it would have looked fine. Not exactly what I was after. Also strength-wise, I mean, these coil hats are only a few mil thick, 3 mil thick, same with the shock tower, looks like maybe 4 mil thick on the shock tower. Now I could have reinforced it, could have definitely made it stronger, and it would have been more than enough. However, I've just decided it's going to be better to do a coilover setup. That's one reason. Tunability of the spring rates. So you've got 2 springs on a coilover, so you can have different rates on that to make really fine tune your ride comfort, or your ride on your vehicle. And also you can have a bit of adjustment in the ride height as well. So the advantage with the hydraulic bump stops is you can really fine tune that full compression point, whereas with a rubber bump stop, it's hard to know exactly where final bump is, because the harder you hit, the more that rubber will compress. So I will still keep the rubbers in. I think that's what the engineer will want. He wants rubber bump stops still, but the hydraulic bump stop will make the final stopping point for the at full compression. So you can really fine tune it and adjust it, so you know it can never really hit short of breaking chassis. So I did toy with the idea of just deleting all the footage you would have seen so far in this episode, because that's not the path I'm going down. But I thought there's probably some benefit for people that are going to do a build similar to this, where they do it on a Colorado or into a Navara or Hilux, whatever. The concept is much the same. It would show you the process that I went through to get to that point. So there is some benefit for some people, even though it's not the final option I'm going down. It's important, I think, when if you have a better idea, or you're going through a build and you have an idea, to pursue it. And if it doesn't work out, then don't be afraid to change your mind. It's no good having an idea and then committing to it, even though you think it's possibly not the best option. So that's what basically I'm doing here, is just changing my mind on the fly, which is important to do, and it does happen during custom builds like this. Now, if I'd have used a kit, all that thinking would have been taken out of it. However, that's just not the way I'm doing it. I've had quite a few requests for this part here, is basically a cost breakdown of what it's cost me so far to do this project. So we'll go through the cost breakdown so far. So obviously in the first episode you would have seen the vehicle that I purchased. It was a repairable write-off I got from the auctions. That was $3,300. The repairs to make that vehicle registrable, so I can get it on the road again, you have to get a roadworthy certificate, and you also have to clear the repairable write-off status on it. So it's a secondary inspection done by Queensland Transport Contractor. So that was about $1,200. It might have been a bit more, because I think there was some fees in there to clear the repairable write-off thing, but roughly $1,200, say $1,500 maybe there. So the 80 series chassis I got for about $2,000. That's roughly the price they go for these days. The axles make up the main component of the price there, because 80 series diffs go for about that anyway, roughly. Then you've got the GU Patrol steering box. That was about $100. Again, that's probably on the cheaper end of the scale there, but it is a little bit leaky. We've got the Superior Engineering panhard rod, which I've just noticed I've spelt incorrectly up there. So save you correcting me in the comments. Yep, I just noticed it. That's fine. You'll live. And the HD tie rod. So the panhard was $275, and the heavy duty tie rod I just got from Roadrunner off-road for about $250. So all up, give or take there, we're at about $71.25. There could be a few $100 either side of that. I haven't been keeping the receipts. I'd rather not know that sort of stuff because usually it blows out. So we'll try and keep on top of that. I'll try and put the budget or the cost breakdown into every episode so you guys sort of know, you can keep track, and so you know how it might apply to your project. So next episode, we'll be going through and designing all the new components that are going to get welded onto the chassis. So we're talking the transmission cross member, the radius arm brackets at the chassis end, coilover towers, and the panhard mount we'll be designing up on SolidWorks, and then we'll send it off to laser cutting and for it to get cut and folded and pressed, and then hopefully we'll get it back in the same episode and we actually start fitting it up. So we're starting to move in the right direction, so tune in for that. Thanks for watching.